folks, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the March 3rd Thursday Web Forum for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy. My name's Hilary Morris. I work on user support and communications for the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. And we host this web forum every third Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. Eastern Time as an opportunity to share the latest updates about the blueprint, get input and involvement from folks like y'all, share exciting science in the world of landscape conservation in the Southeast and Caribbean, as well as lessons learned and success stories from folks really doing conservation action on the ground. Here's our agenda for today. Introducing the speaker will be really quick because it's me and I just introduced myself. I'll talk for 30 to 40 minutes about the blueprint viewers. We'll have time for Q&A and discussion at the end. Then I'll wrap up by previewing next month's webinar, and we do have a couple of staff updates for you from your SECAS staff. As you probably saw, I am recording this web forum just as an opportunity for the couple of folks who inevitably wanted to attend but had some sort of conflict. I will link the slides and the recording of this web forum to the calendar event on the SECAS website within a couple of days. Are there any questions or comments before we get started? All right, so I will go ahead and jump in. I'm going to be talking to you all today about the Blueprint Explorer and the SECAS Atlas and some of our new viewers and pathways to access the Blueprint data online. Before I get into the live demo, which is going to be the fun part of the day, I do want to provide a super fast, like 2-minute crash course on SECAS just for folks who might be less familiar. SECAS stands for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy. It's a regional conservation partnership that spans 15 states of the Southeast, as well as Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. SECAS was started in 2011 by the states who are part of the Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and is co-led by the federal agencies who are working on natural resources in the Southeast. We also have representation from a handful of nonprofit organizations as well. The vision for SECAS is a connected network of lands and waters that supports thriving fish and wildlife populations and improved quality of life for people. And we also have a more measurable long-term goal, a 10% improvement in the health, function, and connectivity of southeastern ecosystems by the year 2060. The primary product of SECAS is what we'll be looking at today, the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. The blueprint is a living spatial plan, a map that identifies priority areas for that connected network of lands and waters that's called for in the SECAS vision. So what we're looking at here is the latest version 2022, which came out back in the fall. And what you're seeing is that the blueprint is prioritizing 50% of the lands and waters of this region that are in some shade of purple on this map. Across most of the geography, the blueprint is based on a suite of natural and cultural resource indicators that represent terrestrial, freshwater, and coastal and marine systems. And it also uses an underlying connectivity analysis. The blueprint is very much a work in progress, and we're very open about that. The blueprint is regularly revised as part of what's been an annual update cycle. We're always looking to improve the blueprint priorities based on input from new partners, feedback from blueprint users, and just better data and science about what conditions are really like on the ground. So as part of that annual revision cycle, the blueprint and the approach that we've used to develop it has evolved pretty dramatically over the years. And if we look back to the distant past, the year 2020, this is how we were making the blueprint by stitching together all of these different sub-regional plans across sub-regional boundaries, almost like squares of a quilt. And some of you might have been involved in developing some of these sub-regional plans. A lot of them got their start with the landscape conservation cooperatives or the LCC partnerships. But last year, we took a massive leap forward in the consistency of the underlying data and methods that we use to make the blueprint. So you can see we went from kind of this wild mosaic to a much more streamlined set of inputs to the blueprint using consistent methods and data across the continental Southeast as well as the South Atlantic marine environment. So we fondly call this the base blueprint, that plan you see in green on the map, because it's forming the base of the Southeast blueprint. And I bring this up because this is going to influence what we see in the viewer today. You're going to have the most fully functional, fully fleshed out experience within that green area of the base blueprint, because that's where we have that consistent stack of methods and data. If you're exploring in the blueprint in the marine environment around Florida or around Puerto Rico, you might find that there's less data available underneath the hood. And we are working on that. In fact, that's the main focus of our blueprint update for 2023. We're expanding those consistent methods and data to Puerto Rico and to the US Virgin Islands, as well as the offshore marine environment in the Gulf of Mexico and the full Atlantic offshore marine environment. We're particularly excited about the Caribbean because we've never had a blueprint in the US Virgin Islands before, and the Puerto Rico priorities have been a little bit outdated, so they're due for an update, and we're really excited to expand to these new areas and provide a more fully functional experience wherever you are in the SECAS geography. But just keep this map in the back of your head when you're looking at the viewer today. We'll be mostly focusing on that contiguous southeast. So with that, let's look at how we can access the blueprint data. I always encourage folks to start on the blueprint web page. That's where you can learn more about the blueprint and easily find contact information for SECAS staff who can help you. There's two main pathways to explore the data through our Blueprint Explorer viewer and our SECAS Atlas. So let's get into a live demo and look at what some of this looks like. So here we are on the Blueprint web page, and here you can get some handy dandy background information on the blueprint, and you'll find these three friendly green buttons that will direct you to the main pathways to access the blueprint data. The first is the Blueprint Explorer. This is our simplest, most easy to use online viewer. It's intended to make it super intuitive to discover how your area is scoring in the blueprint and why. You don't need a fancy software license. You don't need any technical expertise. This is a great place to start. If you want to dig a little bit deeper into the underlying data, I encourage you to check out the SECAS Atlas. This is an ArcGIS online hub site that makes all of the underlying data layers available. You can read more deeply about the documentation. You can overlay layers and make your own maps. We'll demo this a little bit later as well. And then if you are a real technical whiz, you just want to download the GIS data and run with it, we have it all packaged up for you in a little zip folder, all of the underlying data and documentation. So you'll see this download pathway pop up as we go through today. But we're going to start in the Blueprint Explorer. This is what it looks like when you land on the Blueprint Explorer webpage. I'm going to start by kind of giving us the lay of the land, and then I'll talk about some of our trusty rusty features that you might already be familiar with, just as a refresher course, and then we'll pivot to what's really new and exciting about some of our new viewer updates. So on the right, you're always going to see the blueprint map, or whatever layer that you're viewing. On the left, we have a sidebar. On the info tab of the sidebar is some background information on the blueprint, instructions on how to use the viewer that you can refer back to at any point. At the bottom, we have a recommended citation for how to cite the blueprint data if you incorporate it into something like a proposal or a conservation plan. I have to give a little shout out to our web developer for this viewer, Astute Spruce. Brendan Ward is our developer, and he is absolutely incredible. So definitely recommend Brendan. That's the info tab. The other tab of the sidebar is our find a location feature. And this is basically exactly what it says, a place where you can type in a location and it'll take you right to it. It's not completely exhaustive. If you type in your address, it might not show up. But generally, if you're looking for a city or a town or a well-known protected land, it'll recognize it. So I'm just going to go to Great Smoky Mountains National Park and click on that location. And you can see it zooms me right in and drops a pin. If I want to get rid of the pin, I just click the little X. And I'm going to be zooming in and out today with the scroll wheel on my mouse because that's what's most convenient for me. But you can also use these pluses and minuses buttons in the upper right to zoom in and out. In the bottom right, we have the legend for the blueprint priority map. If as you're getting oriented and zooming around, you find that the blueprint's in your way, you can turn it off till you find what you're looking for and then turn it back on. It can also be helpful to get oriented to use the imagery-based maps. You can always switch to that using this button in the bottom left. I'm going to stick with gray for today. And then we have this footer. It'll link you back to the Blueprint webpage, and there's a couple of different buttons prompting you to reach out for help. You can contact us if you need to answer a question about the Blueprint. If you'd like to use it in your work, we really encourage you to reach out to your user support staff. If you run into a problem, you think the interface is glitchy, you think the priorities are wrong, please reach out. And similarly, if you have feedback on how we can improve the Blueprint, reach out to us. So these are kind of different prompts that all roads lead to either the Blueprint staff page or to my email. So you're welcome to just reach out to me as well. In fact, we just got some great feedback from some folks working on prescribed fire that we are missing some prescribed fire information in our fire frequency indicator, and they had some great suggestions on how to improve that. So this is the type of thing that we love to hear, because summary data mode. So you see that's the default mode that we've landed on when we load the viewer for the first time, and this toggle is already selected. Summary data does just what it says. It's summarizing the Blueprint data. On land, it's summarizing by 12-digit HUC subwatersheds. A HUC is a hydrologic unit code, and a HUC 12 is a pretty small watershed, essentially. On the marine environment, it's summarizing by outer continental shelf lease blocks. So I'm going to select a HUC and kind of show you what that looks like. I'm going to zoom us into Conway, South Carolina, because I was just working on a use case at Waccamaw River National Wildlife Refuge in this area, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. As you zoom your cursor around, you can see it's highlighting the various HUCs, and I'm going to click on this sort of reverse L-shaped HUC, this J-shaped subwatershed. You can see that the name of the HUC 12 subwatershed is up here in the left to let you know what you've selected. And now the sidebar is updating to show me information about this HUC. So this is telling me how much of the watershed is a priority in the Blueprint and how that breaks down by the different priority classes. And then the hubs and corridors, this is looking kind of at a layer underneath the Blueprint priorities and how this HUC scores in the connectivity analysis. So we can see that we have some hubs and corridors present here. If we hop over to the indicators, essentially what you're seeing is a hyperlink and a checkbox by all of the indicators that are present in the subwatershed that occur there at all. And if I want to learn more about how those indicators are scoring and learn more about the indicators itself, I can just select any indicator that I'm interested in. So I'm going to click on intact habitat cores. And this is telling me that this subwatershed has a lot of these large unfragmented patches of natural habitat. In fact, 46% of the watershed gets the highest score and is in a large core. So we know that this area, again, like the hubs and corridors were telling us, is really important for connectivity. I can also show you what one of the freshwater indicators looks like. We're in kind of the floodplain of the Waccamaw River here, so we've got lots of freshwater indicators showing up. Let's look at network complexity. This is saying that this HUC has a lot of areas with connected stream size classes, and this is really important to provide climate refugia for aquatic species to be able to move as the climate changes. So that's an example of what you can see in the Indicators tab. One other thing I wanted to show you, you might have noticed this link at the bottom that says View this indicator in the SECAS Atlas. If you click this link, this will take you to the page for that indicator layer in the Atlas. So this is kind of a cross link between those two viewer platforms. This is where you can view that layer on its own. You can read more about how it was developed. Why did we choose this indicator? What input data went into it? What mapping steps did we use to turn that input data into the indicator? The final values you see in the legend, everything that we're aware of, the known issues that the indicator isn't doing as well as it should. So really comprehensive information on that indicator if you want to learn more. And we'll talk more about the Atlas later. Again, there's this little push to contact us, and we really mean this. We would love to help you if you feel at all like, you know, this viewer is a little overwhelming, or just I would rather have the confidence of knowing like somebody who is a member of SECAS staff has looked at this and is sure I'm interpreting the information the right way. The viewer is never intended to take the place of that personal touch, so definitely please reach out. The Threats tab will show you information about how that HUC is predicted to be impacted by urban growth and sea level rise. We've added some new functionality to our threat charts with the latest viewer update. So now we're actually showing past urbanization trends as well as future projections. These past trends are coming from the National Land Cover Database. So you can see basically what percentage of this HUC was urban at various points in the past and how much of the HUC is predicted to be urban at different points in the future. One of the things that we updated in this round is that we did switch out the urban growth projections that we're using. You might have been familiar with the sleuth model that was getting a little bit outdated, and there is this new futures data available. The Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center had a lead role in developing that data. And it hasn't been published yet, so we don't have such a clear link to where you can learn more about it yet, but we'll be adding that when it's available. You might notice, if you're really familiar with sleuth, that the trend lines don't look quite as dramatic. You might have seen these big swooping, kind of scary looking urban projections. And we do think futures is maybe a little bit more realistic in how it's predicting the probability of urbanization for any particular pixel. Sea level rise is a similar sort of thing. What percentage of the HUC is predicted to be inundated at high tide under various sea level rise scenarios? We've added a bunch of higher scenarios in this last update. It used to max out at 6, and now NOAA's sea level rise viewer goes all the way to 10. So we've incorporated their data for these higher scenarios. And like I said, it's just showing you what percentage of the HUC is likely to be inundated at high tide under each scenario. If you're familiar with NOAA's sea level rise viewer, that's a really amazing place to go learn more about this data that we're using from NOAA. And then lastly, the Partners tab. This is also had an update in our latest version. We've updated to the version 3.0 of the Protected Areas Database of the US, a USGS data set that aggregates information on protected lands across the country. This is just showing you if there are conserved areas in this HUC, who owns them. And so you can see, not surprisingly, this is probably right over some of Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge. 20% of this area is federal. Most of these are federally owned, I should say. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory. Designation is like if there's some sort of special status, like a designated wilderness area, and then not conserved. 62% of the area is not conserved. This is coming from the same data source. It's just telling you kind of how protected are those areas and what are they managed for. So 38% of this area is managed for biodiversity with disturbance event suppressed. This is GAP status, basically, if you're familiar with that. And then the last thing, to connect with the nearby land trust, this is a little Find a Land Trust feature from the Land Trust Alliance, and it will basically show you land trusts within a 25-mile radius of that HUC. So that's summary mode in a nutshell. If you like what you see and you think, gosh, I wish I could download all this information, you can. Just click this button to export detailed maps and analysis, and you will get a very detailed PDF report with maps and tables of all of the information that we just went through in the viewer interface. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute for a custom area, so I'm not going to download it, but just know that you can always download the information for any summary unit that you select. I'm now going to hop over to this button in the upper right, Upload Shapefile. This is another one that some of you might have used. This is probably my personal favorite feature in the viewer because it's been a big time saver for user support staff when we used to have to do all this analysis in GIS by hand. Essentially what this does is spit out a custom report for any area that you specify. All you have to do is upload a shapefile or an Esri file geodatabase feature class zipped up, and it will spit out a report. And we're going to look at what that looks like together. I'm going to upload the shapefile that I was working on in a real use case last week, the acquisition boundary for Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge. So all you have to do is specify the name of your area as you'd like it to appear in the report, and I'm going to click Create Report. Now these load pretty darn fast considering how detailed the information is, but to save time, I am just going to go ahead and pull up my pre-made report for you, and that'll keep running in the background. So this is our table of contents for the report. You can see the credits are on page 58, so there's a lot of information in here. I wanted to highlight this executive summary because if you download a report on your own, you're going to find that this page is blank and it'll say this page intentionally left blank. But because I was working with a user to create this report for them, I wrote up this executive summary. And I want to mention this because this is the type of thing that user support can do for you to help you interpret the contents of all 58 pages of this report, tease out what's most important, how to kind of craft a narrative that supports what you're trying to accomplish. This is our job, and we would love to help you. So I wanted to show you one that had this custom executive summary. Frankly, even if you are running a report on your own, we'd still love to know how you're using the blueprint. Just shoot us a note and let us know, because that sort of thing really helps us figure out how people are using this data and what we might need to improve in the future. The report starts with some background information on the blueprint, and then we really get into the good stuff, basically maps and tables of all of the data that we looked at in the viewer. We can see the blueprint priorities within the Waccamaw River acquisition boundary, how those priorities break down by category in this table. There's a map of the hubs and the corridors, a table of that information as well. Then this little indicator summary table basically hyperlinks you to a dedicated page within the report that summarizes that indicator information. So you can just click to go to any indicator that you are interested in. I might be interested in equitable access to potential parks. This is sort of an equity-based indicator that's looking within socially vulnerable communities to identify areas where creating a new park would create access opportunities within walking distance for people who currently don't have a park. And so this is showing, and this is something I actually highlighted in this use case, that the northern part of the refuge acquisition boundary, if they were to work on, say, expanding trail networks or doing more land acquisition or making more public access opportunities in that area, that could really advance equity goals. And so basically, as you scroll down, you'll just see all of the indicators that occur within this area summarized by map and table. So I won't go through all of them, but lots of interesting data through here. At the end, we'll transition over to threats. So here's the threats page. Here's the sea level rise inundation map for Waccamaw and how it all breaks down by table. So this is kind of what you were seeing in the chart, how much of the area is predicted to be inundated at high tide at each foot of sea level rise scenario. What I want to show you here is in the report, we have paired these foot-based sea level rise scenarios with time. So NOAA's sea level rise inundation data doesn't tell you when they think 4 feet of sea level rise is going to occur. It just shows you what will be inundated once we get to 4 feet. But you can pair that data with these tables from NOAA's sea level rise report that they just released last year to see, okay, 1 foot of Waccamaw refuge is predicted, at 1 foot of sea level rise, 62% of the refuge is predicted to be inundated. Well, when are they going to get to 1 foot of sea level rise? And you can go in this table and see sometime between 2040 and 2060 based on what scenario we're in, kind of low to high. So at the highest scenario, we'll hit 1 foot at 2040. At the low scenario, we might just be hitting a little over 1 foot at 2060. So sometime within those 2 decades maybe is when the refuge needs to be thinking about being prepared for 1 foot of sea level rise. And then here's the urban growth map. I really like the urban growth map because I think it provides like a little bit more of a nuanced look at what urbanization could look like for a particular area. You can see that while the overall area of urbanization wasn't that alarming for Waccamaw, and when we were looking at the HUC, there's actually 20% of this refuge boundary that has at least a moderate probability of urbanizing by 2060. And so what we run into is that when you're calculating the predicted acreage, when you have a really low probability, and you're multiplying the probability by the area, the acreage looks low. So we're not super convinced that any particular pixel is going to urbanize, but overall urbanization is something that should be on the refuge's radar. And then it's all broken down by how much is predicted to be urban by a particular decade. And you might notice we've highlighted 2060 in this table and in the sea level rise tables. That's because that is the timeline that aligns with the SECAS goal. So that's often a time frame that we encourage people to look in. Then we get into conserved lands, who owns, what kind of ownership the land is in, and what is the conservation status. And then you'll have a list of the protected areas from PAD US as well, the Land Trust Finder too. So that's a report in a nutshell. Let's exit out of that. You can see that the report has downloaded while we were looking. So if I wanted to download it, I'd just save it and it would come right down. I'm going to move us into one of the new features of the viewer now, pixel data mode. So if I want to switch to pixel data mode, I just click this toggle. And essentially what pixel data mode is intended to do is make it really easy to discover how a particular area in the blueprint is scoring at the smallest unit of the analysis. So if you're not super familiar with different spatial data formats, the blueprint and all the underlying data are what's called rasters. And a raster is just a type of spatial data that represents the landscape as a grid of these tiny, equally sized squares. Each of those squares is called a pixel. And the smaller your pixel size, the finer the resolution of your data. So the unit of the blueprint analysis is a 30 meter by 30 meter pixel, and that roughly translates to about 1/4 of an acre, just to give you a sense. So now I'm in pixel data mode, and you can see I'm being prompted to zoom in to select a pixel. Once I zoom in far enough, and I'm going to kind of head for southern Missouri and this area around Mark Twain National Forest, a little bullseye or crosshairs appears on my screen. And this is why the SECAS staff team, we sometimes affectionately call this pixel hunter because of your nice little crosshairs there. So basically what you're doing is you're panning using this hand to move the map behind the crosshairs and zoom in on whatever pixel you want to drill into. So I'm going to choose this section here. And the sidebar, you might have noticed, is changing to show me information about whatever pixel is in the center of that bullseye. So first it's telling me that this pixel is highest priority in the blueprint. That's not terribly exciting. You know, I can tell that from the legend. But when we go down in here into hubs and corridors, it's telling me there's a hub under here, that this is a place that's really important for connectivity. Another thing I meant to mention in pixel data mode is you will see these coordinates of the lat long of the pixel in the middle of your bullseye. And this is actually something that we built in based on user feedback. There was somebody who was using the blueprint offshore to look at kind of some wind lease areas. And it's really hard to navigate in the offshore environment without a lat long because you don't have all this topography and protected lands and things to base off of. So this was something that we added based on user feedback. So just another plug to let us know how the blueprint viewers are working for you, because we really do like to make changes that help people if we at all can. So that's the priorities tab. As we go over to indicators, because we're pinpointing a specific pixel and the pixel can only have one value for a particular indicator, we can go a little further than what we saw in summary mode, where it was initially just showing us whether the indicator occurred there. This is actually telling us how that specific pixel scores. So the pixel in the middle of this bullseye scores really highly on fire frequency. It's been burned 3 or more times between 2013 and 2021. Grasslands aren't super likely here, but we are scoring above average on resilient terrestrial sites. This data comes from the Nature Conservancy's Resilient Land Project and is basically predicting how likely it is that a particular area has the geophysical characteristics and the connectivity that's needed to support biodiversity in the face of climate change. We're not in an aquatic area, no floodplain here, so a lot of the freshwater indicators aren't occurring, but you can see that the HUC, or this particular pixel, is in good condition on permeable surface. It's in a catchment that doesn't have much impervious cover in it. And just like the summary mode, I can click to learn more about each indicator to see a little bit more detail. Like, this is how this pixel scores. Here are all of the other scores that it could have gotten. And then again, there's this cross link to learn more about each indicator in the SECAS Atlas if you want to. Threats, no exciting charts here because we're just looking at the particular score within a pixel. This is not likely to urbanize, not terribly surprising because this is a matrix of a lot of protected lands in this area. We're in southern Missouri, sea level rise, not a concern here. If I pan around, I can probably grab an urban pixel. Yeah, there's one. So you can see I probably hit a road or something because it looks pretty narrow. So you can see that that pixel now is already urban as of 2019. And then partners tab, again, it's saying that this area is federally owned. It's managed for multiple uses. I'm in Mark Twain National Forest. That's not a surprise. A lot of the Forest Service lands are going to show up as managed for multiple use. But if I cruise up to this Peck Ranch conservation area, I'm going to hit a state-owned land just to show you what that looks like. And I did want to show you what sea level rise looks like in pixel mode. So I'm just going to randomly cruise over here to the Gulf Coast of Texas and go back to the threats tab. So you can see what this is showing is at what sea level rise scenario is this pixel first predicted to be inundated at high tide. So if you get offshore, it'll say this area is already inundated. And then as you get on some land areas, you'll see this area isn't predicted to be inundated until 4 feet of sea level rise. This one, it wouldn't be until 8 feet. And this is, again, using that same sea level rise data from NOAA. So that is pixel mode in a nutshell. I do want to look at my notes really quick and just make sure I haven't forgotten anything. Yep, I think that's everything. So now I'm going to take you to the newest feature of the viewer, which is pixel filters mode. And this is something people have been asking for a while, is the ability to, within the viewer, filter the blueprint to show just the part of the blueprint that aligns with their mission, their data, or their goals, or the question that they're trying to answer. And so this mode is really built to help you do that. What we have on the left is a sidebar with a bunch of different filters that you can turn on and off, and you can adjust their ranges. And then on the right, we have the map of the blueprint that will respond to those filters and show you the parts of the blueprint that meets your criteria. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. We'll start really simple. So maybe I want to filter by the blueprint priority, and I just want to see the portions of the blueprint that are in the highest priority class. Well, I can just slide this little slider bar until I've selected the part of the blueprint that I want to see, and you can see how the map changes in response. To clear, I just hit this orange reset one filter button. I could also filter by hubs and corridors. Maybe I want to see the part of the blueprint that is prioritized in the connectivity analysis in some way as either a corridor or a hub. If I just want to look at hubs, I can pull the slider all the way to the right. If I just want to look at corridors, I can pull it all the way to the left. So the main thing to keep in mind as you play with filters is that this is always looking within the blueprint. That's really what it's built to do, is to help you find your piece of this larger blueprint strategy. If you are really excited and you're thinking, can I mix and match filters? I want to combine them and add them together. Yes, you can. Be aware that the way the filters work is that they're considered and filters instead of or filters. And what that really means is that the blueprint map is going to show you places that are highest priority in the blueprint and in a hub. So I like to think of this like I'm on some sort of online retail site, and maybe I'm shopping for like a new pair of hiking boots or something, and I might filter my search results by women's shoes, and I might filter them by hiking boots, and I might filter by waterproof, and I might filter by my size. And I'm wanting to see the shoes that meet all of my criteria. If they only had to meet one of the criteria, then I'd be getting high heels. I'd be getting shoes that aren't in my size. That's not what I'm looking for. And so these filters work in exactly that same way. What that means is, just a little caveat, is that some of our indicators only cover part of the Southeast. They're sub-regional. And it means if you turn on two indicator filters that don't overlap, you can end up with a blank map. So let me show you, just to steer clear of that pitfall. If I filter by South Atlantic amphibian and reptile conservation areas, that's just showing these parkas within the South Atlantic. If I also turn on Great Plains perennial grasslands, well, there's no pixel that is in the overlapping criteria of in the Great Plains and in the South Atlantic. So the map is blank. So if you run into this, that might be what has happened. But let's look at some filters that do actually stack and play nice together. Let's say that I am interested in doing some riparian buffer restoration. And so maybe I'd want to look at the part of the blueprint that is within the natural land cover in floodplains indicator. So right off the bat, it has basically filtered the blueprint to look within floodplains because that's the area that's covered by this indicator. So this is looking at how much natural land cover is within the estimated floodplain by catchment. I might not want to do restoration in areas receiving the highest score because these are already in great shape. They might not need restoration. So I'm going to adjust the slider to exclude that highest class of the indicator. Now, maybe that's not enough for me. Maybe I'm looking for places where that riparian buffer restoration would also benefit forest breeding birds in the Mississippi alluvial valley. So I can turn on the second filter of MAV forest birds reforestation. And again, this has by default just gone ahead and filtered by the Mississippi alluvial valley because that's the area covered by this indicator. And you can see we're selecting the whole range of this indicator from least likely to benefit birds to most likely. Well, I don't want to do restoration in places that are least likely to benefit birds. I want to highlight the places that are really going to do some good for birds. So I'm going to adjust the slider to the top range of this indicator. And you can see now we've been pretty selective. We've highlighted like just these pixels that are meeting these criteria. But if that's what I'm looking for, this could really help guide where I want to go with this restoration work. So that's two pixels working well together. Look at my notes one more time. Okay, so one cool thing about how pixel filters and pixel data work together is they're all built on the same underlying stack. And that means that I can come over here, set some filters, then go over to pixel data and drill into the subset of the blueprint that I've identified. So this can be really powerful. I've kind of narrowed the blueprint down to this subset, and now I want to learn about the particular pixels that I've identified. Now, if you find that, whoops, I didn't mean to leave those filters on, I want to see the whole blueprint, you can still do that. This little orange button is reminding you, hey, you have 2 pixel filters on, and you can just click this to reset them. Now, one other really exciting feature that I want to share with you all, you might not have noticed because it's pretty subtle. This was almost a little gift that our software developer hid in here for staff, but we loved it so much that we decided we had to make it public. You see this little button in the upper right that looks like 3 stacked layers. So it's not available in summary data because summary data works on kind of a completely different back end, but both pixel data and pixel filters have this handy dandy button. And what this allows you to do for the very first time is view a layer other than the blueprint in the Blueprint Explorer. So if you're tired of looking at the blueprint and you want to see, show me urban growth, you can do that. Click on urban growth, and now that's what you're viewing. If you want to see those hubs and corridors that we've been looking at, you can turn that on. And any of the indicators, what were we just looking at? Mississippi Alluvial Valley reforestation, you can look at that full indicator here. Now, something to be aware of is that these different layers and the pixel filters will also work together. And this can be pretty powerful, but it does add a little bit of complexity. So let's say that I wanted to filter the blueprint to look at areas predicted to be impacted due to sea level rise. So I'm going to turn on the sea level rise filter, and I'm going to restrict my range just to show places that are going to be inundated between 1 to 10 feet. And you can see that's really narrowed down the blueprint to these kind of low-lying coastal areas. Now maybe I want to look at, okay, of these sea level rise risk areas, which of these are likely to be really resilient to the effects of sea level rise? So we can turn on resilient coastal sites, which is using data from the Nature Conservancy, and I'm going to look at areas that are above average resilience. And now this has narrowed us down even further. So maybe I'm going to zoom in to coastal North Carolina here, but maybe I want to look at the blueprint. Maybe I want to actually see those resilience scores. I can go in here and turn on resilient coastal sites. And now I've still filtered to the part of the blueprint that meets all of these criteria, but I'm looking at the resilient coastal sites indicator. So this, I think, is pretty cool. It does mean you can get some wild and crazy combinations. So if you are going to combine the filters and the view of the different layers, you might just want to be a little bit thoughtful about what layers you're turning on and why. If you ever get some crazy combination that you're like, wow, I'm really overwhelmed, you can always just go back to the blueprint priority. You can clear your filters, or honestly, if you really just need a clean slate, you can always just reload the viewer and you'll start over from scratch. So that's our crash course on the Blueprint Explorer. I hope that you'll play around with it and let us know what you think of some of these new tools. I also want to briefly show you the SECAS Atlas. So I'm going to go back to our Blueprint webpage and click the second button. The SECAS Atlas is really a kind of our replacement for the Southeast Regional Conservation Planning Atlas. If you were familiar with those data basin-based CPAs, this is an ArcGIS online hub site. So from the Blueprint webpage, it takes you to the Blueprint page of the Atlas. I'm going to back out one step just to kind of show you more how the Atlas works in general. Basically, this is just a gateway in ArcGIS Online to maps and data and lots of other resources that you can use to inform your conservation work. The main things that we're linking to are that blueprint page of the Atlas, and then we are cross-linking to the Blueprint Explorer that we just left, and that download link, here it is again, to download the blueprint data if you prefer just to work with that zip folder. We are showing you which indicators are within each of these bins: the terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, marine, and cultural. If I click cultural, it'll pull up here are the map services for our cultural indicators in the blueprint. At the bottom, we have some information about neighboring initiatives that are kind of sister partnerships to SECAS and covering other parts of the geography. And we keep linking back to SECAS staff because we really do want you to contact us, I promise. So I'm going to go over to that blueprint page. You can also get there from this button, View Blueprint Data. This is the page of the atlas that's dedicated entirely to the blueprint. Again, download the data in the zip folder if you want to, read a little bit of background. A good place to start is this quick start map, and this is opening in AGAL's map viewer. It's showing the blueprint by default. I can X out to hide the legend. And if I want to look at some other layers that are preloaded in this map, just for convenience, I click this little stacked layers button. If you're familiar with AGAL, this will probably look similar to what you're used to. But if you're not, it can be a little bit of a learning curve. We've grouped the layers together to try to make them a little easier. So if I don't want to see the blueprint, I can click that I to turn it off. Maybe I want to look at one of our indicators, like let's look at Atlantic migratory fish habitat. I can turn that one on and you can see that that layer has pulled up for me. If I want to see the legend, I just click this button. So you can cruise around and really overlay this quick start map or any of these layers with other data that's on ArcGIS Online. So if I want to add, like let's say I want to add like the PAD US protected lands, I can go to Browse Layers. I'm going to go to searching all of ArcGIS Online, and I'm going to look at PAD US, all of these different map services that USGS has made available for PAD. Maybe I want to do it by just publicly accessible PAD lands. I can add that to my map and it shows up. You can see there's the symbology. If I'm tired of looking at PAD, I can go back to my layers and just turn it off. So these are ways that you can kind of interact. We're trying to save you time by preloading a lot of these layers in this quick start map. I'm going to hit the back button to go back to the blueprint page. Here is the documentation associated with Blueprint 2022. The development process is kind of our final report. It's a really long, detailed PDF about how we developed all the data. The blueprint change log is essentially our record of what we've changed in each version of the blueprint and why. And then here is each individual data layer associated with the blueprint as an ArcGIS Online map service. So all of the subregions where we ran the blueprint, all of the indicator data layers, all of the full continuous zonation results before we've kind of cut it off at the top 50%. We've got our hubs, our corridors. We try to make the threat layers available too. We have NOAA's sea level rise information here. Futures, that urban growth data set I mentioned isn't published yet, so we haven't been able to pull that in yet, but if they make a map service, we'll pull that in too. And so you can click on any one of these, like maybe we want to learn more about East Coastal Plain open pine birds. Just click Explore. It'll open that layer individually for you in a map. You can read more. This is just a little summary of the indicator. Click View Full Details and you'll see all of that documentation. So these are the pages that we were linking to from the sidebar if you wanted to learn more about an indicator within the Blueprint Explorer. So that's kind of the hub and the main features I wanted to highlight there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off our demo here, and I just want to wrap up with a few next steps for the viewer. We are about to embark on a round of user testing to see whether people find all of these new features and tools intuitive, whether we need to make some refinements, and we'll be making improvements based on whatever feedback we hear. We expect to have the 2023 blueprint data on the SECAS Atlas and in that download package, that zip folder, by the time we release the blueprint in October. That's kind of the products that come with our official release. And then oftentimes it takes us a little bit longer to get the blueprint data loaded into the Explorer because there's a lot of processing that needs to happen on the back end. So typically we expect that to happen around the end of the calendar year. So with that, I think we could spend our last 10 minutes or so on questions before we move on to a preview of next month's webinar and some staff updates. So I'm going to stop talking and have some water and see if anybody has questions.
And Hilary, we had a couple questions in the chat, and I just wanted to kind of mention them. Somebody was asking about, like, how do I get that executive summary again? And just because chats are so dynamic, I just wanted to say, user support staff, we make those executive summaries by hand. So if you get a 65-page report and you feel like that is too much to go through, we're happy to kind of take the big nuggets of information out of there and summarize that within a page or two and add that to your report.
Thank you so much, Louise. Yeah, it's hard to see the chat when you're sharing your screen, so thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I see Kevin was asking if there's a way to import your site boundary into the pixel mode and highlight your site. Gosh, that would be so helpful for getting oriented. That's a great suggestion and something we can definitely bring back to our developer to talk about. But Louise is right that unfortunately it doesn't do that right now. If you want to look at your custom area, you kind of have to go the report route. Does anybody else have questions or suggestions? That would also be welcome.
This is Joe in South Carolina. Hey.
Hey, Joe.
Great presentation. It's cool to see all of the new improvements going on. I had just a quick question about the urbanization data that you had in the trends category. Is there, this is something that's been coming up with some of our state level prioritization projects as well. And I was curious if that source data is available anywhere as well? The features data?
It should be available really soon. They're waiting
okay.
to publish, and it's one of those situations where they're trying to do a big public release through USGS, which I think can be a little bit time consuming. But the PI has been incredibly good to work with, and it might be the type of thing that, she was comfortable sharing the preliminary data with us. It's really big. The files are huge. So we might have to figure out how to share that with you, but that I could check with her and see whether that's something they'd be comfortable with. I think the public release is coming this spring.
Okay, great.
So, but yeah, we've been fielding a lot of questions from people interested in futures for sure.
Gotcha.
I will make a note that that's something that you're interested in. And if we get wind of the public release, we can let you know.
Perfect. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great question. Hi, DJ.
Hey, Hilary. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
Okay. Good to see you, and great stuff here. This is awesome. I hadn't seen a full demo of this yet. Obviously, I was aware of some of what was going on, but apologies if you address this. But when you were doing the Waccamaw example and pulling out summarization data from that boundary, did the probability of urbanization get removed from existing permanently protected lands?
Yes.
In other words, on those summary data got pulled out?
Yes. Protected areas from, I believe it's PAD US, are not, they're assumed as kind of exempt from urbanizing.
Okay, because it looked like some of the urbanization pixels would have overlapped with existing protected areas.
Yeah, I think partly what's going on there is what we were looking at was the acquisition boundary for the refuge. So there,
right.
That's, I'm sure BJ knows this, but for anybody else, the acquisition boundary kind of looks at where the refuge is able to acquire land from willing sellers, but they don't necessarily own it. A lot of those lands are leased at Waccamaw, and a lot of the acquisition boundary actually hasn't been acquired yet. So my thinking is that the parts within that refuge boundary that were predicted to urbanize were the parts that aren't actually owned outright or protected yet.
Okay, yeah, it's been a long time since I looked at that. I was involved in the initial establishment of that refuge way back when, but I haven't looked at what's been acquired since then. So, good stuff. Thank you.
That's a good question. Yeah, thanks, BJ. Any other questions? All right, I'm not hearing any, so I'm going to move on, but we can come back to any questions again at the end. Here's what to expect from next month's web forum. I am so excited about this talk. We're going to be hearing from Mary Kate Brown with the Nature Conservancy in Alabama about Bayou La Battery and a newly restored and resilient waterfront community. They've been doing a lot of living shorelines work out that way. And so this webinar will be the 20th of April, same time, same connection information as today. I will just say Louise and I saw Mary Kate speak about this project at the Gulf Shores, Alabama Climate Adaptation Science Center symposium last year, and we're totally blown away by the amazing work that TNC has done here and some of the challenges that they faced and the lessons that they learned. So this was a very collaborative living shoreline restoration that was implemented by the Nature Conservancy together with the city of Bayou La Battery, the state wildlife agency, the county, NIFWIF, very big, large scale project. They created breakwaters, and marsh and scrub habitats were restored. They excavated tidal creeks. They installed almost 100,000 native plants. And since they installed this project in summer of 2020, they had 5 major named storms come through and really test the engineering of this site. So I'm so excited to hear Mary Kate speak a little bit more about this project and some of their lessons learned that they took away from it. And then we do have a couple of updates from SECAS staff. We are now underway with the draft of Southeast Blueprint 2023 that we'll be presenting for review at workshops. And those workshops are coming up the last 2 weeks of May. So for this, I'm going to ask Rua to provide a little bit of update on where we are with the 2023 Blueprint.
Yeah, so you remember Hilary's slide showing the expanded area we're covering with the consistent methods for the Southeast Blueprint for 2023. So that's a whole bunch of new area, the Gulf Ocean, parts of Atlantic, the land, and a bunch of ocean around Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. And so, yeah, we've been all working hard as staff and with various folks and in some various meetings. We just finished the indicators, 22 different indicators between the Caribbean and the marine area that we're going to have ready for this workshop draft that Hilary mentioned later in May. So we've got indicators. They're a really solid start. And so for folks that are interested in seeing some previews about what those new areas are going to look like in the blueprint, giving us some feedback so we can improve them, end of May, you'll get a chance to look at the different indicator, or get a chance to look at the draft priorities coming out of those areas, which is super exciting. And then, as Hilary mentioned, all that new tasty information is going to be going into the hub, and then eventually into the Blueprint Explorer that she showed. So you'll be able to do all the cool stuff you've seen up here, but also farther out into the Gulf Ocean, also in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And so yeah, very excited about that. And keep your eyes out if you're interested in blueprint stuff in the Caribbean or out in the deeper ocean of the Gulf and the Atlantic.
Thanks, Rua, for the update. And then the next thing I wanted to share, like I said, workshops to review those draft priorities are coming up the last 2 weeks of May, and they're really going to focus on these areas where we've been making major improvements. Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and some of the marine area around them, and then those Atlantic and Gulf Shore waters. So if you came to a workshop last year, we were focused really on that contiguous Southeast area. This year, we're going to be focusing on the marine and the Caribbean. Registration should be open by the end of this month. I'm looking to put a blog announcement about workshops in the March SECAS newsletter where you can go ahead and get registered. If you've been involved in developing the blueprint, if you've come to a previous workshop or you've served on an indicator team, you will also get a direct email invite to make sure that you don't miss the opportunity to review if you would like to. And then as a heads up, I've actually gone ahead and dedicated the May 3rd Thursday web forum slot to a combined Caribbean workshop. So on the 3rd Thursday of May, during this time slot, we'll be looking at the priorities for both Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. That web forum will go a little bit longer because the workshops are an hour-and-a-half slot, so that'll go 10 a.m. Eastern to 11:30 a.m. Eastern. But if you've already got your calendar marked for the web forum, feel free to join us for that workshop. It'll probably be via Zoom instead of via this Teams link. So with that, I always like to end on this slide of how to get more involved in SECAS. Please do sign up for the SECAS newsletter. You can do that on the footer of any page of the SECAS website. I hope that my message came through loud and clear. SECAS staff, especially the user support folks, would love to connect with you. So please reach out to us. Our contact information is on the staff page, or you can see what organizations are participating in SECAS governance on the partners page. And then please explore the conservation blueprint. Go to that blueprint page, mess around on the Explorer, mess around on the hub, make some reports. Let us know what you think, or as Louise said, if you want help in one of those fancy executive summaries, we're happy to help. So that's all I have. Are there any additional questions for me about this presentation or more broadly? Yes, so thank you all so much for tuning in. We hope that you'll join us in April to hear from Mary Kate. We hope you'll join us for a blueprint workshop. Thanks so much for listening. That was a lot of talking for me today. So have a great rest of your week and weekend, and see you next month, hopefully. Bye, everybody.